Hi everyone. In 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross published her classic book on death and dying, in which she outlined the concept of the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But while she spoke in terms of stages, it was never her intention to give the impression that grief happens according to a neat, predictable sequence, because there is no one way to grieve. While there may be commonalities, every grief process is as unique as the individual. Solomon said there is a time to weep, there is a time to mourn. But he didn't say when, he didn't say how, and he didn't say how long, for good reason. Now, when Kubler-Ross spoke about depression, she wasn't talking about clinical depression as we understand it today. She was using the term in a general sense, in terms of sorrow, heartbreak, the normal sadness that we experience when we miss somebody who we have loved and lost. But what her work did was to normalize sadness, was to see sadness as a valuable part of a grieving process. Now, while it may sound counterintuitive to see sadness as beneficial, what the research indicates is that sadness actually helps us to heal. It gives us space to slow down and reflect. It helps us to appreciate the value of life. It helps us with the formation of memories. And it creates a space for us to exercise self-compassion and self-care, all vital elements of a healing process. So sadness is not self-indulgent. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of a lack of faith. It is a sign of our humanity. And if you doubt that, we have copious examples in the Bible of great characters who went through their own periods of sadness. Abraham weeping at the loss of his wife Sarah. David saturating his pillow with his tears. Job rueing the day that he was born. Habakkuk mourning over the condition of his people. And the list goes on and on and on. But it doesn't stop there. The shortest passage in the whole Bible informs us that Jesus wept. Jesus, who was the Son of God, Emmanuel, was able to identify with our deepest emotions. God himself was not immune. One of the most powerful images that comes out of the Bible we find in Jeremiah chapter 13, where God has done everything in his power to bring Israel to himself. And he makes a final appeal to them, and he says to them, "But if you will not hear it, my soul shall weep in secret places for your pride, and my eyes shall weep sore and run down with tears." Powerful image of a God who finds a quiet place to bawl his eyes out for the loss of his beloved Israel. So sadness is normal. For those of us who are supporting those who are going through their grief, it is vitally important that we don't allow our discomfort with the emotion to lead us to try and get them out of sadness too soon, because that's where they might need to be at that time. And that requires a level of self-awareness on our part. It requires empathy on our part. I love this quote from Pema Chodron. She says that compassion is not a relationship between the wounded and the healed. It is a relationship of equals. That only when we know our own darkness can we sit with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. So supporting those who are going through grief and going through sadness is not about becoming comfortable with the emotion. It's about being willing to sit with the emotion, being willing to be present. Paul puts it this way: weep with those who weep. And that may be a challenging thing to do, but it is such a compassionate and a loving thing to do, to be able to be present with somebody in their sadness. And it's about allowing sadness to serve its purpose. And the purpose of sadness is to move us toward what Kubler-Ross described as acceptance. And acceptance is when we come to the place where we accommodate the loss that we have experienced. But an important part of acceptance is learning how to experience those emotions that we also associate with well-being and with happiness. In other words, giving ourselves permission to laugh again. Now that may sound like a strange thing to say, but there are those who are going through grief who sometimes feel guilty when they experience those positive emotions, as if it's a betrayal of their loved one. There are some who feel that they are obligated to prolong their sadness in honor of the one that they have loved and lost. But acceptance is about experiencing all of our emotions. It's about coming to a place where we allow ourselves to be able to experience joy. And again, that may sound like a strange thing when you're going through a grief process, but it is necessary. I remember watching a movie, Good Will Hunting, and there was a scene in the movie where the lead character, Robin Williams, who's playing a psychiatrist, is supporting a young man who is going through problems, but he's a bit of a genius, and they have this relationship where they try to break through barriers, and eventually the psychiatrist is able to build a relationship with this young man. And they're sitting in his office, and Williams shares this anecdote about his wife, who he had lost through cancer. She died in his arms. And he recalls this one time where they're in bed together, his wife is sleeping, and she breaks wind so loud that she wakes herself up and frightens the dog in the process. And these two guys just fall about laughing. And reflecting on that, it was a funny scene, but it was also very poignant, because here was a guy who was able to laugh, but yet desperately missing his wife. You know, the Bible says to us in Luke's version of the Beatitudes, he says that those who weep will laugh. Solomon says there is a time to weep, but he also says there is a time to laugh. And I know that it is difficult. It is so hard, especially when the grief is recent and when it's raw, to appreciate the words of Tennyson when he said that it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. But God's grace gives us the space, it gives us the capacity to appreciate that the depth of our sorrow is a measure of the depth of our love. And that the gift that he has given to us, that what he has allowed us to experience for a season, is a cause for joy. And what helps us to appreciate that joy is our memories. J.M. Barrie said that memories allow us to pick roses in December. I love that thought. But there will be those periods of sadness. And when that sadness comes, sit with it, learn from it, heal through it, and lean into the arms of the one who will hold us through the pain, and who has said in his word that he will give us beauty for ashes, the oil of gladness for our mourning, that he is able to give us the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. And trust that the God who is willing to hold us in our times of sadness is also able to give us dancing in place of our mourning. God bless you.